Good afternoon. Thank you for attending the TIDE test setting and the test supports accommodation form webinar today. We appreciate you taking the time, especially on this beautiful day, to attend. My name is Abe Christ, Bureau Chief for Student Assessment in the Performance Office at the Connecticut State Department of Education. It is our office that administers the Smarter Balanced Assessments, the CMT CAP Science Assessments, our alternate assessments, as well as the College Board SAT. On this webinar about TIDE test settings and the test supports accommodations form, Joe Menta will be describing the connection between this form and entry into the TIDE system. This is another webinar our office is offering this fall to support your testing efforts in the districts. We have previously done webinars on the interim assessment systems, actually a total of 4 of them, as well as the College Board SAT accommodations. These have been posted on our website. Also on this webinar, our colleagues from the American Institutes for Research, AIR, who is our test vendor, will be present. Jen Cho, our project manager, is present for questions that they may need to manage. Please be aware that we have muted all participants on this call. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A feature and send them to the host/presenter. We'll try and answer them during the call or at the end of the call. We'll be recording and posting this presentation, so if you missed any details or want to spread the word to your colleagues, we'll make the recording available soon on our website. I will now turn the presentation over to my colleague, Joe Menta. Thank you.
Thank you, Abe, and welcome everyone. Again, as Abe mentioned, this presentation is intended to look at the new TIDE test setting. As you know, there have been some major improvements made to the look and functionality of TIDE this year, and we wanted to make sure that you were aware of how this impacts test settings for students. So we're going to look at how the test accommodation form that hopefully all of you are familiar with interacts or compares to the TIDE test setting online. A couple of things to note. We are going to post the PowerPoint that you're going to be looking at through this presentation in the next couple of days, and a couple of things to note about the PowerPoint that you're looking at. Some of the PowerPoint images, if you're looking at the screen right now, you should see 2, one the comparison chart and one the test accommodation form. They have a yellow border around that. What that will symbolize is that there is a linkage to the actual document. So when you do download that PowerPoint or this PDF of the PowerPoint, you will be able to click on those different images and bring up the various either websites or the documents that are referred to in this presentation. So let's start. So basically, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to be covering in this webinar and then go into details about it. And then, as I mentioned, if you have questions, please send those to the host, and we'll review the questions by the end of the presentation or near the end of the presentation. So basically, this first slide is showing you the TIDE accommodation or TIDE test setting and the accommodation form, and we'll look at both of these documents and to see how they relate to one another. As we go through this, I'm going to point out some resources that are available, and one of them is this document called Managing Student Test Settings. This has been available for the last couple of weeks on our website, and it will also give you some detailed instruction around both how to enter test settings for individual students in TIDE, as well as how to do a batch or bulk upload of accommodations into TIDE for your students. I realize many of you have an IEP system, and you probably are waiting also to find out how your IEP systems will interact with the new TIDE system. What I'll be covering is exactly how the system works right now from our perspective. We will also look at, as mentioned earlier, the new TIDE test setting system and look at how you can both download the spreadsheet or the Excel file to do a batch upload of students, as well as looking at how to enter accommodations on a one-to-one basis for students. So that's something we'll be covering. This is a screen capture of what I'll go over in terms of how the new Excel spreadsheet that's used for that batch upload or for entering groups of students all at once into the new TIDE system. And then finally, we'll look at special situations such as special accommodations and what the procedure is in terms of special accommodations and what needs to be submitted to us and how that is done and what that means for you in terms of entering accommodations on the TIDE system. So let's get started first by looking at something you're all familiar with, and that's the test accommodation form, which again, as you probably realize, this changes every year, and that's because of the new changes or additions to the test accommodations or test supports that are available to students. I want you to make note of a couple of major changes for this year. One of them, of course, is the fact that science now is online for all students. So I've received a few calls already about the old accommodation of online testing for science. Since the online testing is for everyone, that has been removed from the test accommodation form since, again, it's available for all students. One thing that is new this year for all students, including general ed students, is the ability to have the science test read to you through text-to-speech. So that's something new and something that should be considered as a possible test support for some of your general ed students. But this is the new form, and it includes some of the other new things that are available because of changes or additions to the accommodations of support, including things like the hundredths number table and the simplified test directions. This chart is also going to be posted, and basically what this chart does is on the right-hand side under the yellow banner, what you're basically looking at is the test accommodation form that I just showed you. And right next to that is how that translates to individual requests for those accommodations or support in TIDE. And again, I will show you those in detail later on, but let me focus in on one particular one. If you look at the one for the embedded text-to-speech for that does not include ELA reading passages, if you go over under mathematics, the tool name is TTS for text-to-speech, and the value will be one of these two. If you do nothing at all and the student doesn't receive text-to-speech for the reading test, it will be none, which is the default. Or if you do select text-to-speech for the reading test, it will say, or you will choose stimuli and items. For the ELA, and remember, ELA, there are parts of the ELA that do not include the reading passages, and therefore it is considered a designated support and is allowable for anyone. You would be able to select the text-to-speech, and you would select items, and therefore that student would get everything other than the reading passages read to them. And then, as I mentioned earlier, text-to-speech for science is now available for all students, and that selection would be under stimuli and items. So by selecting stimuli and items, you're now allowing that student, even if it's a general ed student, to receive the science test read to them during testing. So this is chart basically, and again, this will be posted, shows you what it looks like on the right-hand side on the test accommodation form and what you would need to choose in TIDE. So now let's take a close look at TIDE and see how this plays out. Now, of course, you'll need an account in TIDE to be able to get in, and based on the account level you have, that really allows you to determine what you're able to do in TIDE, which means that in some cases, unless you have a higher level account, such as a school administrator or a district administrator, you will not be able to enter certain kinds of accommodations, but we'll talk about that later. But let's take a look at the new TIDE, and we're going to go under Student Settings, and we're going to look at View and Edit Student Settings. So I'm going to select a demo district. And what you're going to see is basically a list of all the students in that particular demo district. And these are, again, make-believe students with make-believe accommodations or test supports. And I'm going to choose one that hasn't been done yet. So I'm going to choose, let me choose this student here. And the way I would get to that particular student is by clicking the little pencil. And it brings up the test settings for that individual student. Now, since we've been talking about text-to-speech, I'm going to show you how to make text-to-speech available for the student on all parts of the test. So I'm going to look here. I'm looking at the fact that there are 3 columns, ELA, mathematics, and science. And I'm looking at the text-to-speech as a designated support and accommodation. And I'll explain that in a second. And so basically for ELA, if I click on this, it gives me 2 options. Items, and remember, items is a designated support, and therefore it's allowed for, of course, special ed or 504 or EL students, but it's really allowed for all students if they require that. If you do select passages and items, then it becomes an accommodation, and there are other procedures, and we'll talk about that later on, where accommodations such as this require you to submit to us some additional information. So I'm going to select for this student, for example, passages and items, which means that the student will have everything in ELA read to them, including the reading passages. When I go over to mathematics, there's really only one choice, stimuli and items. And basically that means if you select that, the entire math test will be read to them through the text-to-speech feature on the computer. And as I mentioned earlier, mathematics and this is still considered a designated support. And then for science, stimuli and items would be the choice I would select if I desire a student to have the science test also read to them. Little side note here. If you do have a student who requires the passages and items read to them, basically what you're telling us is that the student has a true text or reading disability. And therefore, good practice would be that if the student is getting passages and items read to them, you should select to have both the mathematics and science test read to them. We couldn't see or understand a reason why the student would need the reading passages read, but nothing else. So something that you should consider when, for your students who do qualify for the passages and items part of the test. So that's basically it. So I'm not going to go through any of the other ones. All of the other accommodations and supports are here. They all are have little drop-down menus, or if they're simple in terms of turning the feature on and off, all you have to do is click on the on button to turn that on. So in this case, I just turned on American Sign Language video for the ELA test. So once I selected all of the accommodations and supports for individual students, I would just hit the save button, and now it's saved with those supports and accommodations. And now they would appear for that student here. Now, if you notice, what happened is that now not only does it indicate, and I'm looking at the column here for text-to-speech, not only does it indicate that the student is getting text-to-speech for science, mathematics, and ELA, but it has to populate, unfortunately, but it does have to populate all of the defaults on all the other settings. So what do I mean by that? Well, basically, it tells you, for instance, for color contrast, it's defaulting on black and white. So instead of telling us what they want, it tells us what they want as well as what they're not getting. So just make a note of the fact that once you enter one accommodation or support, it's going to give you information on everything else. And that's important, especially if you download this as a spreadsheet and you're trying to do some evaluation of what kids are getting in your school. All right, so now let's take a look at what it looks like in terms of a batch upload. So what is a batch upload? A batch upload is what happens when you have a whole bunch of students and you want to enter all those students at the same time. Now, again, if you have an IEP system and the IEP system is programmed to create the Excel file that allows you to do a batch upload, then basically you would pull from your IEP system and then that would be uploaded into the Tide system. But let's take a look at how you get to that file. So I'm going to go here, again, Student Settings. I'm going to click on Upload Student Settings. And what you see here is basically the procedure for uploading the file. So what file do I upload? Well, first I have to download the file that is the spreadsheet for me to have the information. So I would recommend, in most cases, an Excel file is the preferable one, and that's the one I'm going to show you in a second. So I click on here, and it will give me this file. So let me make this a little bit larger so you could basically see how this works. So this file is basically a spreadsheet that wants to know specific information about students in terms of who they are and what supports and accommodations they need. So let's say you have a student whose SASA number is this, and the accommodation has to do with ELA. And let's say that accommodation that we want, we'll stick to the same theme, has to do with text-to-speech. So, and this is important, not to remember that it is a little, if it's a long list and you don't see something, make sure you use the little sidebar there to get to the bottom of the list. And I'm going to select text-to-speech. So now I have, for this student here, ELA, text-to-speech, and I'm going to select for the student, as I mentioned earlier, if it's a support, I would select items. But let's say I want to give that student the reading passages and everything else in ELA. So I'm going to select passages and items. Now, if that student also has, that same student also has other accommodations, basically, the student's SASID number goes in there again. This time it goes to mathematics. Let's say it's text-to-speech also. And let's say for text-to-speech, since there's only one choice, I'm going to choose stimulus and items. And same thing again. Same student. Let's say this time it's science. Stick with text-to-speech. And I would select stimuli and items. So right now, this student is getting text-to-speech for all 3 subjects. Now, the reality is probably this student may have other accommodations and supports. And basically the same thing would apply here. You would indicate the student's SASID number and then what the individual tool name is, and then what the specific value of that tool is. So this file, once it's completed with all that information, or once your IEP vendors have it available through your IEP system, will be filled with all the information similar to this: SASID number and specific subject, tool, and value of that tool. Once that's all done, it is then uploaded through the TIDE system. And therefore, once that's uploaded, they are all available for you to review in the TIDE system. Of course, you will be able to make changes on an individual basis by doing what I showed you earlier. If for whatever reason you do change or add something to it, you could do an individual change to a student by going to that individual setting and hitting that edit pencil button. So that's the test setting in the bulk upload for that. Okay. Now going back to the PowerPoint for a second, I want to make sure that the PowerPoint is clear in what I just showed you. Basically, I'm showing you how individual accommodations or supports are added on that spreadsheet. So you see, you put the SASID in, you indicate the subject, you indicate the tool, and then you indicate the value. So now let's talk about some special situations. As you know, we do have a list of accommodations that we consider special accommodations, and they include scribe, read-aloud passages. Mouse pointer, I'll talk about that later, but in audio transcription, I'll talk about that later, and print on demand. These are situations where a student, because we want to make sure that these accommodations are absolutely necessary, we require that you fill out a petition for special accommodation. And where do you get that? Well, that is something that you've got to get through your district coordinator or your district test coordinator, who would contact us to request the petition. And it does require you to fill out the petition as well as send in the information to us to review. In the case of requesting text-to-speech of the reading passages, there is a form, and the form on the left is something that you could actually print out, and it should be something that allows you to ask those questions either at your PPT meeting or Section 504 meeting to determine that the student does qualify. We will not say no to any request, but basically we do collect this information about who the kids that you are selecting to have the reading test read to them. This year what we've done is, last year basically you filled this out and you were able to submit it to us like this, but this year what we did is streamlined it so that if you hit the submit button, it'll take you to this website where you basically could submit it electronically directly to us, and therefore the student will be registered for us to provide the ELA. Now, as requested last year, we wanted to make sure that this is not something that anyone could request and submit for students, so we have a restriction as to who is allowed to submit this accommodation. And in this case, it's anyone with an SC or school coordinator account or district coordinator account would be the only ones that can actually submit the accommodation and therefore put that accommodation in Tide. So hopefully this is clear. Like mentioned earlier by Abe, we will post this presentation, and I think at this point what I'll do is I'll stop and see what kind of questions have been asked, and then we'll take it from there.
Joe, thank you. So there have been some questions that have been trickling in as the presentation has been going, but if you do have additional questions, you can use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature, to send them through. Up to this point, there's been some questions. One was, how would the general ed teachers get the text-to-speech accommodation for general ed students? Those are entered in Tide as well. Next question we had was, would the general ed students need an SRBI referral to get accommodations? We do not require any SRBI referrals whatsoever. This is a local decision.
It is a local decision, but it is very good practice to have something in writing in terms of for your general ed students. And again, this could be a situation where perhaps you want to make sure that it's in writing and that, for example, the parents are aware that you are providing something like that for a student.
Next question that came in was, so does that mean when Joe was referring to text-to-speech, ASL is available to students who can't hear? Generally speaking, ASL is independent of text-to-speech. It is available as an embedded support for the math and listening items and also the STEMs. It's available for science as a non-embedded support. Excuse me, as an accommodation as well, too. That's important to note. Next question was, would the accommodation for general ed students you spoke of only be for the science portion or ELA and math as well? I think in terms of that question, I would refer you to the assessment guidelines, which articulates what the designated sports, the tools, and the accommodations are, and it really outlines what is available for gen ed students. Next question, I'll turn this one to Joe. Joe, where can users find the text-to-speech petition form?
Yeah, so basically, as I mentioned earlier, it's available in a couple of different places, but it will be available through this particular presentation. This form right here is hyperlinked to it. I could show you on, let me go to, hold on. On our website, if you go to Special Populations and Resources, you'll find here's the link to the test support accommodation form. Here's the text-to-speech read aloud decision guidelines, which is also the form that you looked at, as well as the some written guidelines as to how to determine if a student qualifies. So if you click on here, you would get the text-to-speech form. And again, this is the paper version of the form. Print it out, answer these questions. When it's time to submit this form, you click on the submit button and it will bring you to here where you would be able to actually do the submitting of that form.
Thanks, Joe. Next question that came in was, can we just offer can we offer supports to regular ed students with no backup? I think Joe just referenced that in terms of it's not required, but there is a best practice.
Yeah, I mean, you know, basically we present, we do a separate presentation on accommodations, and one of the things we stress about providing any kind of supports to the student is to make sure that the student truly needs it before you offer it. There is a danger of offering something that can be more of a distraction than it is help. So you want to make sure, especially with general ed students, who, and a general ed teacher who may not know the subtleties of what a student may need, they may need a little more support and help in determining the need of a general ed student. But SRBI, Student Support Plan, is a good way to sort of think about what the student needs and plan for it.
Okay, next question comes in, relates to the spring SAT. Again, that is a different sort of avenue in terms of entering accommodations. I would encourage you to go to the SAT section of the student assessment website, where we have posted a webinar that really articulates all the things that are necessary to provide for accommodations for the SAT. Next question is, where will users be able to access the text-to-speech for ELA passages in a digital form? Joe, do you want to handle that one?
Could you repeat that question? Where?
So the question comes in, where will you be able to access the text-to-speech for ELA passages in the digital form?
So I think I showed you what that was, and basically that is this is the form itself, and then the website is this one right here, where you would have the digital form for you to submit your text-to-speech request for students. So basically, yeah, you fill this out and you submit that, and then the student is registered for text-to-speech of the reading passages.
Okay, thanks, Joe. One last question here, and I know that this has come up. I don't know if you had addressed it specifically in the presentation, Joe, but it relates to the IEP Direct download or upload.
Yeah.
A user downloaded it from IEP Direct, and it was not in the same format on the Excel sheet.
Yeah.
Instead, it is one line per student. Can you address that?
Yeah. Again, your individual IEP vendors, and IEP Direct is just one of the vendors, is responsible for converting their form, their Excel form, to align with the new TIDE system. I'm not sure where they are in that process. Hopefully you're in contact with them and know or have received word as to when they should be done with that. There is still time in terms of doing that batch upload. In fact, it may be too early to do a batch upload for kids because you may be having IEP meetings and 504 meetings still. So you still have time for that. Unfortunately, if you're trying to submit accommodations for kids who are taking the interim test, you know, that may have to be done on a manual basis, either through the spreadsheet, the way I showed you, or going in by an individual student and submitting whatever the accommodations they need for the interim assessment.
Thanks, Joe. At this point, we have not received any other questions. We will wait for a minute or so here if you would like to enter any more. I would like to remind you that if you do have questions after the webinar ends today, you can forward or you can send your emails to ctstudentassessment@ct.gov, and we will take the questions there. That's probably the easiest way to follow up. I do have another question that came in related to a follow-up from Joanne's question. Why wouldn't districts then choose to have all students have the text-to-speech for students? Isn't this an unfair advantage to all Connecticut students?
Yeah, so good question. Again, one of the things to note about the text-to-speech feature is that it could promote or engage the student in the content if the text-to-speech is something the student is both familiar with and actually needs. We've actually have done studies around text-to-speech and having students who didn't need text-to-speech. And what our studies have shown, and this is one of many other studies that's been out there, is that sometimes providing something like text-to-speech or any kind of accommodation that is not needed can actually distract the student from the content itself. So that's why we say do not take lightly the decision-making process when it comes to providing specific things. For example, you wouldn't provide large print booklet to a student that doesn't need it, so the same thing should apply to any of the supports or accommodations. So you really want to know the need of the child and relate the supports and accommodations to that need.
Okay, Joe, we have a couple other questions that have come up, Why can't SPED and EL teachers enter accommodations on TIDE for their students?
Why can't they?
This is really dependent on the district, depending on how users are set up in TIDE based on the user roles in the TIDE user manual. They may or may not be able to. I would consult either with your district administrator and also the TIDE user manual to identify which user roles in TIDE can enter accommodations and which users cannot.
And of course you do need an account. So the first thing you should be able to obtain is an account on TIDE in order to access the TIDE setting.
Another question, will subsequent batch uploads overwrite the original upload?
Good question, yes. So let's say you wanted to do a batch upload in mid-December and then do a final one in mid-February. You would then override any of the old information on students with the information you just uploaded.
Okay, we have a flurry of questions here now. So is simplified test directions the same as reading the directions to the student?
No, it's actually a brand new support that is being made available, but just to let you know, it's not available yet for you to download. It's going to be posted on the AIR site, and basically what the thought process behind this is to take the directions that are read to the student by the teacher and simplify the content of those directions so that it's less word heavy and more straightforward in terms of directions you're giving to the student. Now it's up to you to decide which students need it. It is a support, and therefore it is available to all students. If you decide you're going to use that support with your entire class, you could certainly do that also, or you could subdivide your group to for students who need it read in terms of simplified test directions or regular test directions.
An attendee asked, can you provide the email address? Sure, that's ctstudentassessment@ct.gov, or for those of you that have interacted with Joe or myself, you can certainly email directly to us. An attendee, Joe, is asking for clarification. Is text-to-speech of ELA reading passage available to Gen Ed students?
No, they're not. No. This is an accommodation, and therefore only available to special education students with an IEP or Section 504 students. But not only that, it should be clear, and that's why we ask you to fill out this form here, the text-to-speech form. We want to make sure that you're selecting it for kids who have a print disability, some kind of dyslexia, or something that's preventing them from reading the test on their own. So it shouldn't be taken lightly. It should be something that's thoughtfully decided for your students.
Okay, next question. Can you explain what the benefit of using the batch upload would be over clicking on each student in student settings?
Sure. So once you have the file available through your IEP vendors, if you happen to have an IEP vendor, you would have filled out the test accommodation form, this form on the right, on your IEP system, and therefore someone in your district would then download from your IEP system into an Excel file, and that all those kids would be uploaded all at once. When you do it as an individual basis, and again, for your general ed students, you don't have an IEP system and you don't have anything that allows you to do a batch upload. The only way you could put in your supports, and remember, only supports because accommodations are not allowed for your general ed students, would be to do it on an individual basis.
Okay, next question. When can we start to enter accommodations into the TIDE website?
Right now.
You can do that right now. It's open. Yep. When will IEP Direct have the correct accommodation form?
That's something between you and IEP Direct.
And what about ELs who don't have a system to pull from in terms of the IEP?
Yeah, so again, EL students are considered general ed students. So you would have to enter, similar that in the way we've been doing it for years, either manually one by one by looking up each individual student, or you could do a batch upload of those students on the spreadsheet by just creating a spreadsheet for EL students in your district and then just uploading your EL students into TIDE.
Let's see, we have the last question at the moment. Will you email us this presentation, or will it be on the website? Yeah, we will be emailing users the PDF of the presentation so you can utilize it for training. We will also post it on our website and link it in the student assessment news in the subsequent send. And once we have closed caption the presentation, which should be in the next week or so, we will also post this live presentation for those of you that might want to turn it around for your staff. I do have one more question here. Does the form for ELA passages being read have to be completed each year for each student? Joe?
Yes. Yeah. Again, this is a decision that has to be made, and it should be considered, since it is a PPT decision, it should be made on a yearly basis. So it is something that should be filled out and submitted to us. Again, there's nothing on our end that says the student will be denied that, but we are closely monitoring to make sure that these kinds of questions are being asked at the PPT or 504 meeting to qualify the students for this kind of accommodation.
Okay, when will the simplified test directions information be available?
Yeah, so we're hoping that they will be available in the next couple of weeks. They are putting some finishing touches, and again, this is coming from Smarter Balance, and therefore we're waiting for, because it is a Smarter Balance test, we're waiting for this to be released, and then we will make it available on our website. It'll be a non-secured thing, so you could download it and use it during testing.
Okay, we have another question that just came in. If we do manual entries for our 504 students which are not in our IEP Direct system, will the batch uploads for our special ed students overwrite those?
No. So what it does is it matches SACID numbers. So if you do a batch upload of only special ed students and you happen to have put in manually all your 504 students, as long as the SACID numbers don't match, it doesn't override any student whose IEP is not on that spreadsheet. So it only overrides it if you use the same spreadsheet again with the same students on it. That also applies for your EL students. So if you put in your EL students manually and then you do a batch upload from with the Excel file of special ed students, it will not override that.
Okay, looks like we have another question here. Joe, can you explain the mouse pointer accommodation?
Yes, so thank you for reminding me. It's a brand new feature that we're basically sort of trying out this year. It's basically, it allows someone to select, or right now it's we will do the setting for you. There should be a real need for it. These are kids who are severely visually impaired and are taking the test online, and what we're hearing is that even though the text is enlarged, some students were having a difficult time with the mouse pointer. So it is a new feature. We didn't want to open it up as a general accommodation, or because it's it shouldn't be used for general ed students unless it's absolutely needed. It could be a real distraction because it covers up lots of the text if you enlarge the mouse. So if it's something that you would want to request for a student who's visually impaired, let us know about it. There's no petition that's required. A simple phone call will do, and we'll turn that feature on for you. You will be able to try it out on the practice site so that you can make sure that it's available or it's something that a student finds desirable.
Okay, we have a few more questions here. Joe, you're doing great. Keep it up. What do you suggest we use for a child with severe vision issue that requires font increase in daily work? Would it be preferable to order a large print science or use the science test in Tide?
Yeah, so of course this always comes up in terms of students' best practice for being able to take a test that needs to be enlarged. Depending on the child's visual acuity, if you can get, the problem with the test being a large print is that it's no longer, for Smarter Balance, it's no longer an adaptive test, meaning then it becomes a fixed form test. So the student would be taking a much longer test on paper, and then basically that teacher would have to submit that test to us electronically so that we get that information. So whenever possible, we would recommend, because of the feature of adaptive quality of the test, try to give the student the test on the computer. Now, having said that, it really matters the size of the student's screen. So you don't want to give the student, a visually impaired student, the test on a Chromebook because the screen is a 10-inch screen. You would want to find the largest screen possible. We've heard of cases where, and this is very creative, they've given the test on a smart board where the entire smart board becomes the screen and the student is able to read off of the smart board.
Okay, so just a clarifying question. So you can, in terms of the uploads using the Excel file, you can edit the original Excel batch upload with changes and submit it again, and it will keep the old info but update the new info.
That's correct.
That's correct. All right, we'll give it another 30 seconds here. We have 10 minutes left in the webinar, but we will wait. If you have any more questions, just send them through the Q&A feature. Again, we appreciate your patience today, and thank you for attending the webinar. Once again, CT student assessment at ct.gov if you have questions after the webinar. Okay, another 10 seconds or so and we will finish up. So we do have one more question here. Just in terms of clarifying, and I think the level of access you need for accommodations. Again, I would refer to the TIDE Users Guide, which articulates all the user roles and which of SCs, TAs, TEs, DCs, DAs have access to do what.
Right, but as this slide shows, for example, for text-to-speech of the ELA reading passages, you would need to have an SC or DC account to be able to actually make the changes or add that as an accommodation.
Okay, we are going to end the webinar at this present time. Once again, we appreciate your attendance today. We hope this was a useful resource for all who attended, and we will be posting this we will be sending the PowerPoint presentation to attendees probably within the next 24 hours. We will be posting it to our website, and then within the next week or so, posting the whole presentation to our CSDE student assessment website. Thank you again, and have a good afternoon.